watching the Mystical Green Beanie.
Hey, what's going on, dudes and dudettes? I am the Mystical Green Beanie, and in today's video, I thought I'd, talk about Star Wars Episode 8. I'm not doing a best of, worst of review for it. I'm just going to talk about it because as I was writing my review for Star Wars Episode 8, The Last Jedi, I realized that for every positive that I had for the film, there was an equal negative. And the film's funny that way because that's more or less what the movie is about. I mean, the movie's about a lot of things, but one of the core ideals that the film tackles, and does quite well actually, is this exploration of what the Force is. And not just that, but how it achieves balance. And it's weird because even though it flies in the face of all of the original expanded universe material, it strangely makes a lot of it better retroactively. Specifically the stories between Revenge of the Sith and A New Hope. This idea that the Force is, well, a force that requires unbiased balance is fascinating to me, and it actually retroactively makes that concept that was introduced in the prequels of The Chosen One far better, in my opinion. Because I know a lot of Star Wars fans like the idea of The Chosen One. I'm not one of them, but with this movie in mind, I can appreciate it a lot more. Because looking back, Anakin did in fact bring balance to the Force. He all but wiped out the Jedi who were the dominant force in the galaxy. And with the rule of two being implemented by both he and his master in the original trilogy, this means that the Force as an entity was at peace. It was balanced. But ever since Vader was redeemed by Luke and killed his master and then died himself, that balance that the Force had was lost. There was no counterweight to the light side of the Force. The Force idealistically should be viewed as a weighted scale. Both sides providing an equal counterweight to the other, keeping the Force itself balanced. Only problem with that is both sides are constantly trying to vanquish each other, leaving the Force in a constant state of flux, meaning that as long as there are Sith and Jedi, the Force will never be balanced. And this is all stuff that's been handled in the original expanded universe before, but I really like the way that the lore is played with here, and all the stuff dealing with the Force is great. It's just all the other stuff that I don't like. All the character reveals and reveals for motivations that characters had in episode 7 that I don't like. Because this film is built almost entirely off of the subversion of expectation. Basically, imagine the scene where Kylo Ren is taking off his helmet in episode 7, and once he takes it off, underneath there's just a guy. There's nothing unique or distinct or weird about him. He's just a normal looking dude. That's what all of the reveals in this movie is. Or are. English. Why is Luke Skywalker in exile? There was a misunderstanding. Why did Kylo Ren turn to the dark side? There was a misunderstanding. Why does Kylo Ren hate Luke Skywalker so much? They had a misunderstanding and both parties grossly overreacted. Who created the map to Luke Skywalker? Actually, they don't answer that, even though that's the main plot of The Force Awakens, but whatever. Who are Rey's parents? Nobody. They don't matter. Rey is her own unique character. Kinda. I'll get to that later. Who is Snoke? Nobody. He's just a random dark side user who's manipulating the Skywalker legacy for his own personal gain. And then he gets cut in half, and Kylo Ren takes over. And these are all very interesting concepts, and I don't hate the ideas behind any of them. This idea that anyone can be a legend or an important figure in the Star Wars universe without being tied to the Skywalker legacy is fantastic. This notion of someone from the dark side of the Force trying to use a prominent figure from the light for their own personal gain is inherently fascinating. And I love the idea of letting old things die and moving forward with a fresh slate in the context of Star Wars. You know, even in the trailers and in the film itself, Luke Skywalker says something along the lines of,
"This is not going to go the way you think."
And indeed it doesn't. And Rian Johnson deserves all the props in the world for trying something new and being subversive with this franchise. The only problem is, this is a sequel to a film that is the exact opposite. The Force Awakens is a very shallow, nostalgia-driven, very safe and wholly uninteresting installment in the Star Wars franchise, with new characters that I either found uninteresting compared to similar characters in the original expanded universe, missed opportunities for something cool, or just coasting off a great performance. And the entire plot of The Force Awakens, when it's not being a remake of Episode 4, is a mystery. You know, how does this character know this? Why does this character know that? How did this character get the status quo? Why does this character have the status quo? You'll figure out in another installment in this franchise. Answers will be revealed. And all the answers that are given are underwhelming. And for me, that retroactively makes Episode 7 the foundation for this new trilogy a far worse movie than I originally felt it was. And one of the biggest problems that this movie has is that it's such a tone shift in terms of narration and theme from the previous installment, and it feels like a soft reboot within this trilogy. And it really showcases just how hollow Episode 7 really was, and if anything, this should have been Episode 7. This should have been the starting point. This should have been the foundation for the new trilogy. Well, maybe not narrative-wise, but thematically at least. Because what that tells the audience and the fans is that every bit of investment that they had, whether it be in the mystery or the nostalgia that was presented in The Force Awakens, it's all just a bunch of BS. And don't get me wrong, I understand why people who like this movie appreciate it, but for me, it doesn't really work in relation to the foundation for this new trilogy, and that's my main problem with it. All the other issues that I have with this movie they're very small, relatively speaking, because what they just boil down to is, I've seen this in the previous Star Wars Expanded Universe, and they were done better. Rey and Kylo Ren just feel like discount versions of Jason and Jaina Solo. And the whole plot where Luke goes into exile after his nephew turns to the dark side is handled in the original Expanded Universe. But I think it's a little better handled in the Legend series as opposed to here because it's more fitting with his character. And I see what Rian Johnson was going for with Luke and how, you know, he's dealing with this idea of what happens to a person when they start to feed into the legacy that's built around them and they start to feed into the hype, and that can lead them to doing unimaginable things, but it just doesn't work here in my opinion. Also, there's a whole side plot that talks about war profiteering, and it's fine, but it really detracts from the film. And again, this is something that I've seen handled in the original Star Wars Expanded Universe, but better and more interestingly. And at the end of the day, this is just a lot of concept over execution, because this is a very well acted and directed deconstruction piece. I don't feel like it's a bad movie at all, but once you start trying to deconstruct Star Wars, that's when you kind of start breaking the universe. Now, I've been hearing a lot of people say that Rian Johnson hates Star Wars because of this movie, and this proves it, but I don't think that's the case. I don't think Rian Johnson hates Star Wars. In fact, I think Rian Johnson loves Star Wars, just like J.J. Abrams loves Star Wars. But these are two guys who love Star Wars for different reasons. The best offhand comparison I can make is Zack Snyder and Joss Whedon. These are two guys who very clearly grew up reading comics and grew up loving comics, but they had very different takeaways from these stories and these characters. Which is why Batman v Superman and Age of Ultron are essentially the same movie, but they're told from two different perspectives. One film has a more lighthearted tone and the other has a darker tone. Meanwhile, one ends on a more somber note, whereas the other has a more optimistic ending. And I feel like that's very applicable here with Star Wars. J.J. Abrams loves Star Wars because he's nostalgic for Star Wars, whereas Rian Johnson loves Star Wars because he's very interested in that mythology and what it means and what it can be turned into. And these two perspectives are fine individually, but when you put them together, it doesn't work. These two perspectives, funny enough, mirror the light side and the dark side of the Force. Ideally, they should balance each other out, but they don't. They cannibalize each other. Anyways, with all that said, I was not a fan of this movie. I respect what Rian Johnson was going for, but just doesn't work as Star Wars for me. But what about you? Did you like Star Wars The Last Jedi? Did you not like The Last Jedi? Let me know down below in the comment section. Also, if you like this video, hit the like button, share, support the channel, and if you want to see more content like this, all you have to do is subscribe. I'm the Mystical Green Beanie. Thank you for watching, and as always, until next time, adios, nachos, adios. I feel like I should have done that like when I said the adios, nachos, but I didn't. That was weird. Oh well.
Show me what you got.